Hi there, it's Jen from Jen's Homemadeology, and today we are going to be making the Taylor Convertible Duffle in the birthed version. Now, if you're looking for the binded version, please check out my other video, as I do have one for that process. The Taylor Convertible Duffle is the travel bag that's been most asked for. This travel bag features a front zipper pocket, a back slip pocket that can double as a luggage sleeve when unzipped. It features two side pockets along with a D-ring on both of those. That is great for making a crossbody strap. You can use the new Sewfisticated sling strap, which is a padded strap, which is great for carrying the extra weight. This is a separate pattern, and I do have a tutorial for this one too. The Taylor Convertible Duffle features optional clip covers. Well, these parts right here are optional. There's a separating zipper. Interior. Fold it all the way down. And there's mesh pockets on your side that you do have the option to do dividing pockets on them. You have a flap cover that has a zipper pocket on it. That can hold a hanger so that you have a suit compartment. This bag also features straps for your handle for an easy grab. And then there's 5 purse feet on the bottom. And there's the overview of the Taylor Convertible Duffle in the birthed version. Now let's go ahead and walk through our pattern pieces and supplies needed to make this bag. Now we are going to walk through our supplies and materials needed for the birthing version of the Taylor Convertible Duffle bag. First up, you'll need 2 pieces of A for your exterior panels. Piece of A1 exterior for your base. And then a heavy stabilizer for your A2 base. Your separating zipper for ZA along with a pull. Now if you've gotten a nylon separating zipper that's a number 5, you can use any of your normal nylon pulls on it. Piece of B for your front pocket. Piece of B1 for your back pocket that's also a luggage sleeve. 2 pieces of B2, which are your linings to those 2 pockets. 2 zippers of ZB with a pull for each. And then your ZTB zipper tab. And your 2 pieces of C that are cut in half per the pattern piece. You'll need 2 pieces of C1, which are the bottom half of the C pattern piece. 4 pieces of C2 stabilizer, which is the Declaville light. I'm going to use a foam since I don't own any Declaville. And then 2 pieces of D1, which is a ribbon or a water resistant canvas. You essentially want something that does not have stretch and is very durable, because this is going to reinforce those D-rings to the bottom of your bag. As an option, you can do 2 of CC, which are your clip covers, 2 of ZC zippers, each with 1 pull, your ZTC zipper tab exterior, and then your ZTC1 zipper tab lining, 2 pieces of mesh fabric for C3, and then 4 pieces of D, which I have 2 different ones because 2 of these are for the linings of the zipper pockets that are on the side panels, and then 2 of these will go towards the very interior of the bag. So I wanted these to match my interior and my pocket linings to be a pop. 2 ZD zippers along with 2 pulls per zipper, as these are the zippers that allow your bag to open up and those side gussets to flap down. And then your pieces to make those zippers into a zipper gusset. So your ZTD zipper tabs, 2 exteriors, and then your ZTD1 zipper tabs, which is your lining to those, and that would make your gusset zipper. Now for your lining supplies, you'll need 1 of E. This is that really big piece of lining fabric, which is your main base. And 2 pieces of E1, which are your flap covers. This is recommended to do a lightweight, waterproof, or water resistant fabric that doesn't quite have a right or wrong side that you don't need to interface. This is Dragon Sheen, which is a bonded nylon, so the back is okay to be left uncovered. But it does have that little bit of structure to it. And the other one I'm using is a twill. And then a ZE zipper with a pull. This is your zipper that makes that zipper pocket on your flap. And then the zipper tab to it, which is ZTE. Then you'll need 4 pieces of F. These are your suit compartment linings. I'm gonna have 2 of a print for my upper part of those flaps, and then I have 2 solids for the lining part of it. And those are long pieces. And then a piece of F1, which I personally recommend having the same color as my piece E as that big main lining, because this will match your top part of it and it kind of like frames it. So I personally like doing that the same fabric as piece E. And then your zipper ZF along with a pull. This is your zipper for your suit compartment. And then your piece of Velcro that is ideally 3/4 of an inch wide. I do have the self-adhesive kind, but it's not needed to have that, as you can just use double-sided tape to hold it in place before you sew it on. Your 2 pieces of smaller webbing that are cut per the cut list. These will be your D-ring tabs on the side panels. So your 2 D-rings that you have will need to be the same width as your webbing. I'm using 1.5 here, so it matches the strap that goes on my front and back panels. Those are also cut per the cut list. But if you wanted to have a longer drop from the top of your bag to your arch, which would be your shoulder to the top of your bag, then you can definitely make these longer. I'm using a 1.5 webbing to make carrying my bag easier. It is recommended to use that, or at least a 1.25 inch, since it's such a big bag. And then you will also need any tags that you would like to use for your mesh pockets, or any label tags for your front pocket. And then a form of binding or bias tape for your mesh pockets. And then you'll also need 5 purse feet. If you're doing the option for the snap cover, you will also need 4 sets of snaps. So in total, you would have 8 caps, 4 of the sockets, and 4 of the studs. Make 4 complete sets. Now that we've gone over the supplies needed for our tailor duffel in the birthing version, we can go ahead and start our prepping of our side panels and our base. Now to prep our panels per page 6 of the instructions for our tailor convertible duffel in the birthing version. Now you'll need your top pieces of your C. There's your 2. And we are going to find our center top of that curve. We're going to measure down 1 5/8. Again, I'm going to mark a straight line so my stabilizer goes straight, and then the center of that point. And repeat on your other panel. And I'll take your 2 pieces of C2 stabilizer. Place those down and then fuse them. I'm using a self-adhesive since I don't have any Declaville. But doing this now will then give these pieces some time to cure and hold in place to be nice and strong for your D-rings. So those are those 2 pieces, and now we can work on our base and applying the purse feet. And now also per page 6, you'll want to prepare your base before sewing. And so you'll have your piece A1. And if you are using Declaville light or heavy, you'll want to fuse it now and allow the glue time to adhere. If you are using foam on the base, you can go ahead and baste it on around the seam. And then if you are using a self-adhesive, like I am, you can go ahead and peel and stick it. I went around and traced on the part for the stabilizer when I used the projector version of it. You can also use the pattern piece and trace those on just to help it stay out of your seam allowances when you're sewing. The good thing about the self-adhesive foam is that you don't get it exactly where you want it right away. You have a little bit of time to play before it really seals to your fabric. And once you get that attach, you can make your placement for your purse feet if you are doing those. You'll want to find your centers. All of your sides. Which might have been smart to do before doing the stabilizer, but it's okay if you don't. Okay. And then you can find your center. Okay. And then you can find your center and mark it. So one of your purse feet are going to go there. And then from your side center, you are going to measure 3 1/8 inch up, and also the same down from that center point. And you'll do that on the other side. And now from those points up and down from your center, you're now going to take that point and draw inward. And we are going to go in 4 inches. And purse foot will go there. Same thing from that bottom one. Inches. So again, from our 2 side center points, we measured up that 3 1/8, measured down 3 1/8, and then from those markings, we then measured in 4 inches to find our purse feet. So you'll have a purse foot here, 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 and then in the middle. Now you'll want a dowel, or you can use a punch, anything to make your holes for your purse feet. Just make sure that when you're doing it, that you're not making a hole too big, because you don't want your purse feet to slide right on through. Just want it big enough for the hardware. I have the screw-on type. One, and then you can use a little bit of super glue on your screw in order to prevent the purse foot from falling off if you would like. If you have the type that have, like, they have 2 little brackets on it, you can go ahead and to press those out. And then after you are done, you can cover those with a piece of painter's tape. It will also help keep it in place and protect your sewing bed, and also just give a little extra buffer from that screw messing with your fabric once the bag is made. I'm gonna go ahead and do my others, but I need to grab my screwdriver so I can just tighten that a little extra. Okay, now I have the screwdriver. Just gonna tighten that a little bit. Cover that and repeat with my other ones. if you do use glue, make sure that you are working quickly and carefully to ensure that glue does not get anywhere it shouldn't on your fabric, and that it doesn't set before you can get that screw in. Those. No. There's base with the purse feet. And now we are going to prep our piece of D lining with our stabilizer and ribbon. Now we are going to quickly prep our pieces of D lining that are going inside of our zipper pockets on the side. As remember, we have 4 pieces of these D linings. So the ones that are going into our zipper pockets, we're going to find the bottom center and our top center. And on the wrong side of our fabric, take and baste, take our piece of ribbon with its center lined up against the bottom center of D, and then baste this on. And now and then repeat on your other panel. Following up your ribbon to make it centered. And then from your center top, measure down 1 5/8. And then with your ribbon centered, take your remaining 2 pieces of C2, 1 per panel, and center it along that line that we drew, closing in your piece of ribbon. And then if you're using Declaville, you can go ahead and fuse that. And there's that. And then this way, this will give your D-rings more reinforcement once we attach this to our panels. And so our D-rings through all of our layers, but we'll give this time to cure. And now you can repeat for your other panel. Now let's start sewing our tailor convertible duffel in the birthing version. First, you'll take one of your pieces of B. If you have a logo tag, you'll attach it to your bottom center at least 1 3/8 inch away from the bottom. I don't have a label tag that I'm going to use, so I'm going to skip over that step and start our zipper pocket assembly, which would be to take both of our zippers of ZB and their pulls, along with your zipper tab of ZTB. Singe our zipper ends. Slide on our pulls, which I like to do it by starting to take the tooth that is on the lowest side and inserting that into my pull first. And then repeat on your other zipper. Now you can take your zipper tab and cut it in half. Now from your end that you just put your zipper on, you're going to take your zipper tab and place that right side down. So again, ensuring that your tab is going on the side of the back end of your zipper, so that way it doesn't slide off. Your other end will be your 90°. And then sew these on with a 3/8 seam allowance. And you can unclip and fold it back and then meet the end of your zipper tab to meet down to your zipper tape, and then fold again to enclose the end of the zipper tape, and it will cover your previous stitches. Repeat on your other. Now top stitch with a 1/8 seam allowance. On your zipper tape, you want to measure up from your tab and measure 8.5 inches up. Make a marking on both sides of your zipper tape. And repeat on both of your pieces. Now you'll go ahead and separate your zipper, and at that line's going to fold up to match. And I'm going to singe those. You can also baste to keep them in place. Repeat on the other side. Now before moving forward, you want to ensure that these zippers are the same size and that they measure 8 5/8. I'll go ahead and set one of your zippers aside. And then taking your panel B, which is your front pocket panel, and one of your zippers, find the top center of your panel and the top center of your zipper. And placing those right sides together along that center point. I'm going to baste this on with a 1/8 seam allowance. Now Now taking one of your B2 linings, placing it right side down so that your sides are right sides together, encasing your zipper. Now you can sew with a 1/4 seam allowance. You can now snip your seam allowance corners, and if you have any excess zipper, then you can get rid of that. And then because I cut my zipper, I am going to singe that top part again just for a little extra security. Now you can turn your fabrics right side out. And you're going to baste around the perimeter and top stitch along your joined seam. There's that. Now we can set this aside and work on our back panel pocket. So this is your back panel slip pocket / luggage sleeve. So your B1. And then your other 90-degree zipper tab that we made. Again, finding the center points of both sides of our zipper. And then similarly to our front pocket, we are going to mark the center of our panel. This time we're going to mark the bottom part of our panel, because this is where our zipper is going to go to take our pocket from being a slip pocket to being a luggage sleeve when unzipped. So matching right sides together along that center point. Now basting along this edge with a 1/8 seam allowance. And taking our lining piece of B2 and matching that right sides down, which would be right sides together with our panel. And now this time sewing with a 1/4 seam allowance. And then again, cutting any of your remaining zipper tape if there is any, and trimming your seam allowance corners. Now before turning this one out, we are also going to sew our top edge, so the edge opposite from the zipper of the seam that we just did. And we're also going to sew this seam with a 1/4 seam allowance. And trimming those corners. And then you can turn out now you can press this top seam and also press the bottom seam. Now we're going to sew around our perimeter with a 1/8 seam allowance that will top stitch our top and bottom seams and be basting our sides. And there's that one. Now you can set this aside with your other pocket. And grab your ZA zipper, which is your separating zipper, along with its pull. Now remember, you can use any type of pull that you would like, that you would normally on zipper tape, as long as it is the same type as your zipper. So a nylon zipper for number 5, which is the type of zipper tape I have, even though it's a separating zipper. We're gonna measure up 18 3/4. Now that we have our marking, we can go ahead and slip on our zipper pull. So when you unzip it, then you'll take the side with the stopper and you will slip on your pull from the bottom end. Go ahead and singe this. And then slip your pull on from the bottom side of your pull. Slide it all the way down to the stopper. So now this would act like a normal jacket type of zipper, where you take the end with the slider and slide it in, and then holding your bottom secure, pull your zipper, pull up. And now you can make your 90-degree ends by folding that line to the top of your zipper tape. Be one side. And you can either singe or baste those. And then again, your other side. There's those. And now you can measure your zipper tape to ensure that from the end to the top that it is 18 7/8 inches long. And once you've measured and ensure that it's the right length, you can actually unzip it and separate those for step 8. However, noting that some testers did prefer to sew this separating zipper onto the panels without separating it first to ensure that it lined up perfectly. However, as long as you follow these steps that I'm about to mark out, it will line up perfectly and it'll be easy to get in because of your zipper ends for that separating zipper. Now you're going to take your zipper without the pull first. I'm going to put my pull one off to the side. And take your front panel. This is your zipper with just the little slider and your 90-degree end. Find the top center of your panel. And then find the center of your zipper tape. Now place that right sides together along that center marking. And then you can clip out on each side. Now, within doing that, matching your centers and working your zipper out, you're ensuring that your zipper will end a 1/2 inch off of each side, which is exactly what it should do. And now you can baste this on with a 1/8 seam allowance. Now you can double ensure that your zipper ended and stopped a 1/2 inch away from your side. And then repeat with your back panel. Again, finding that center point of your panel. And this time the center point of your zipper with the cap. And then right sides together again. And then work your zipper out. And then you can ensure that it is a 1/2 inch away on each end of your panel before you baste. Now with this one, because I'm starting to baste with my 90-degree angle, and it's harder even with my hump jumper, at least in my opinion, to get that to stay where it should, I like to start farther down on my zipper tape and then back tack back and then sew, just so that zipper end stays where it should. And then you can again ensure that it stopped and started exactly where it should. And another thing you can do is go ahead and grab both of your panels and do a test zip to ensure that everything lines up. And zipper lines up, your panels still line up, all that. Now, if you did sew with these two attached, then you need to unzip them now before moving on to the next step. Take our front panel, the one without the pull, and your front pocket. Now find the center bottom of your panel. Now taking the center top of your panel, which you may need to find again because If you're like me, you marked it over with your zipper. You covered over with your zipper. So there's our top center. And with a fabric pen or chalk, we are going to measure down 5.5 inches. I'm going to measure down from that center 5.5 inches. I'm just going to draw a line and then find the center of that line. I wanted to make sure that my line was straight from the top of my panel before drawing the center of it. There's the center. And now we can draw a line that is 8 5/8 inch long, centering it between that marking. Now the line can be a little bit longer. It's just a straight line across so that you can line up your zipper. So there's that important center mark, and then our straight line that is the same height, that 5.5 inches across the whole way. You can ensure that it is before sewing on your top of your zipper. Now take your front zipper pocket, which if you have a logo tag would be the one with the logo tag on it. It's also the one where our zipper is on the top part of the panel. I'll now place that right side down with the panel hanging off the top of our main panel. Match that center point. Now, to make this a little bit easier for myself, you can either take masking tape or a small piece of double-sided tape and align the top of your zipper. That'll help keep it in place. You can definitely do it with masking tape or just matching along the line as you sew. I'm going to do it with the double-sided tape for one, matching that center point. And it does help to do this with the panel unzipped along that line. Now you can go in and first sew with a 1/8 seam allowance followed by a 1/4 seam allowance. And then before I start sewing, I'm going to trim this excess zipper and then cinch that. And mark it to that line. Now we can sew with a 1/8 seam allowance followed by a 1/4 seam allowance. And now you can do your 1/4 seam allowance, or you can do it 1/8 inch away from your previous stitches. And you can fold down that panel. I like taking the bottom center of the panel, pocket and aligning it with main panel center. And clipping along the bottom edge. Now you can take some masking tape on the sides to hold the panels in place if you would like. You'll also want to measure to make sure that they are the 4 3/4 away from the edge on both of the sides of your pocket. To do that, you can baste these on along the sides and the bottom using a 1/8 seam allowance. Now you can set your front panel off to the side as we prep our back panel with the pocket. Here's your back panel, which is the one with the pull. You're going to measure from your bottom center this time. Bottom center. Measuring 1 5/8. I'm just drawing a line that's first straight across the estimatedly around the middle of my panel, so that one I could get my straight line, and then I can draw the center of that straight line. This just helps me ensure that my line is straight and I actually have the center of it. And now I can carry out and make this line bigger because we want this line to be the 8 5/8. I'm centering it. Now it can be a little bit longer. It's okay if it does wind up being that. You just want to make sure that you're using fabric pen or chalk so that it's erasable. This will allow you to have a straight edge for your zipper. And this time we're going to take our back pocket, which is the one where the zipper is on the bottom. Now again, to help me keep the bottom part of the zipper in place, I'm going to take some double-sided tape along that bottom edge. And also trimming off any excess of zipper tape from the 90-degree end and singeing that. Now, matching the end, matching the raw side of my zipper tape down to that line, matching that center point with the panel hanging off the bottom edge. We will sew our zipper on with first that 1/8 seam allowance followed by the 1/4. And again, similar to my panel with the separating zipper, because I'm starting on the 90-degree end, I'm going to start farther down in the back tack first and then sew forward. And now to sew my 1/4 seam allowance. Now this time you'll flip up the panel. For your zipper tab, you want to make sure that it's not squished down or flattened. And then also still ensuring that your panel is that 4 3/4 away from the edge. And that will be for the same thing for your 2 sides, and this time also from the top. And then you can baste along your 2 sides. Okay, so there's that slip pocket. Now we're going to attach our straps. So I'm going to start off with my back panel because it's already in front of me, though the process is the same for the back and the front panels. Take your webbing. We're going to singe all of our ends. And you can take one of those and set it aside for your other panel. Now, taking it to where it's laid out that your webbing is not twisted. You have a right and a wrong side of the webbing. Make sure that your wrong side is facing down. You want to take about a 5-inch piece of double-sided tape down the back side of your webbing end with it centered. Then you can remove the backing to the double-sided tape and align that center with the center of your panel, matching it down towards the end of your panel. Now, if you have a webbing that has that little line down the middle, that's a great way of being able to match up your webbing. And make sure that it's not twisted, and we'll do the same on the other side. And I'm just going to place the clip at the bottom of these just to give it a little extra reinforcement as I'm moving around my panel. Now, from the top edge of your panel with your webbing straight, you'll want to measure down 4 inches from the top, which with your back panel, it's going to be essentially right above your panel top. And then you'll want to measure down 2 inches from that line, and that will be your box stitching. Repeat on the other side. Now, when you're sewing along your webbing, if you would like to back tack for extra reinforcement across your pocket places, you can. Now we're going to sew up to our 4-inch marking, and then sewing across, and then sewing down to our 2-inch marking, and then pivoting to sew up diagonally, and then sewing back across this top line, and then pivoting to go down diagonally, and then pivoting again to sew across our bottom line, and then pivoting to sew down the rest of our webbing. I'm going to sew up to the 4-inch marking. And sew across that marking. And now sew down towards our 2-inch marking. And then you can back tack across your pocket if you would like. Once you get to your 2-inch marking, we can pivot to sew diagonally up. I like to take and lift my pressure foot, slide a ruler underneath to lay against my needle, and then have the ruler flat with my sewing bed. And then that will ensure that this is a straight line. So then I can move my panel so that the corner of my stitching is in the middle of that sewing path. And I can remove that ruler and I can put my pressure foot down and I can sew up. Now, if you would like, you can put your ruler next to your pressure foot and hold it against the bottom of your bed and then sew up, keeping your panel in that position. And that will also get you to that space as long as you first matched it to the needle point. Okay, once you get to that corner, go ahead and lift your pressure foot to turn. And we're gonna re-sew over those stitches. And when you get to that corner again, we're gonna this time lift up the pressure foot, turn and pivot to sew diagonally down. And again, I'm going to match up my ruler with the edge of my sewing bed and then move my panel to where that corner is in the middle of my ruler. And once you've sewn down to that point, we can now turn to sew across the line. And then once you get to the edge, lift once more. And now we can sew down to the end. If you would like, you can back tack over the bottom part of the panel where the zipper is in order to reinforce it. And then I like to just baste across that bottom part of my webbing. And now that one's done, and you can repeat on the other side. This time I'm going to give you a little bit closer of a view to those box stitches as I do them. I'll start sewing up inch or till we get up to the upper 4-inch marking. Now you can back tack across this panel to reinforce, as this is the luggage sleeve. And once I got to that marking, I sewed across. Now I'm going to go ahead and sew down to my 2-inch marking. Once I get to that 2-inch marking, I'm gonna put my needle and start on the incline, but don't come all the way up. And lift my pressure foot to turn my panel so that I can sew up diagonally. Grab my ruler, stick it against my needle with my ruler against the bottom of my sewing bed so I can get that straight line. Once I have that straight line, I can shift my panel so I can find the corner of those stitches. And I can ensure that that's a straight line. I put my pressure foot back down and I'll sew to that corner. And once you get to that corner, you can start your needle back on the incline so you can turn and sew over your previous stitching. And once you get to the corner, again, start on that incline, turn, and this time we're going to sew our diagonal down. So again, lining up my ruler to my machine and my needle, and shifting the panel. Draw this line darker real quick so you can see it. Shifting our panel so that your edge of the ruler is right in the corner of that. Then you place your pressure foot down and then sew to that corner. Once you get there, start your needle back on the incline and then turn and then sew across that 2-inch marking. Once you get to the edge, again, turn your piece so that you can sew down towards the end, and then I'm also going to baste across the bottom. And now your back panel is finished, and we can repeat the process for the front panel, ensuring that our webbing is not twisted. And taking that double-sided tape, that's about 5 inches long on the wrong side of your webbing, and matching it up towards the center of your panel. Doing that on both sides, making sure your webbing's not twisted. Now measuring down from your top edge 4 inches. And then down from that one 2 inches. Again, following those same steps of sewing up to the line, over our 4-inch line, down to our 2, pivoting to go up diagonally, sewing across that line again, pivoting to go down diagonally, and then sewing across that line and then back down. I'm going to go ahead and sew both of these sides, and if you need a refresher, you can go ahead and watch the back panel. I will say the only thing that's different about this, and don't freak out, is that your height of your panels will be different from where they match. And that's because your gap on your back one has that up, so you have that separation at the bottom. That's not there on that front panel, so therefore there's that difference in those. So this is exactly how the front one should look. And there's your front panel. So now your main body, the front and back exteriors, are now done and are ready for the assembly of the main exterior to the base. I'm gonna go ahead and set my back panel aside real quick. And we're gonna go ahead and take your base, and you should already have, per page 6, already adhered your stabilizer and your purse feet. So we're going to take it to our panel and match that right side down. So your panel and base are right sides together. And we're going to sew this with a 3/8 seam allowance. And then you can snip off your seam allowance corners. Turn your panel out, and then with pressing the seam towards your base, and then pressing that seam towards the base, we'll now top stitch across the base. Again, ensuring that that seam is pressed towards the base, with a 1/8 seam allowance, and then follow that by a 1/4 seam allowance, which you can do them a second row that 1/8 inch apart to get that 1/4. So first, my 1/8 seam. And then before you start, it's also a good time to ensure that your bobbin thread has enough thread in it so that you don't run out during top stitching. Now for your second row of stitches, I'm going to do them 1/8 inch away from my previous stitches. And now the same process for the back panel. Taking the bottom edge of our back panel, right sides down towards the other edge of our base. And then again, sewing with a 3/8 seam allowance. And snip your seam allowance corners again. And we turn out, pushing that seam towards your base. And then if you were getting somewhat low on your bobbin thread, the other time when you check, just double check again to ensure that you have enough bobbin thread for your top stitching so you don't run out. Okay, I'm gonna do it with a 1/8. pushing that seam towards the bottom of the bag. First row, and now your second row. Your main body exterior is now completed, and there is a measurement in step 14 to ensure that it is the right length. You can set this aside. Moving on to our side gussets, we're going to prepare our zippers first. So you'll need both of your ZC zippers along with both of your pulls, your ZTC zipper tab, and your ZTC1 zipper tab lining. Cinch our zipper tape. And you can slide on your pulls. Now, a thing that helps get your pulls on easier is if you take your side that has the lowest tooth on it and slide that side into your zipper pull first, then doing your other one, and having it when you're looking in, having that side as that first tooth. And you can slide it right on. Now with your zipper pulls on both, we can cut our zipper tab lining and exterior into 4 even pieces. Now you want to take your zipper and take one of your exterior tabs and place it right side down on top of your zipper. That for each end. And then you'll take your linings and place those right side down onto your back side of your zipper so that you're sandwiching your zipper in between your tabs. And now we can sew with a 3/8 seam allowance. Now you can turn out your zipper tabs. And now you can sew around the perimeter of your tabs with a 1/8 seam allowance. your 2 zipper tabs. There's your 2 zippers with your tabs, and we can set these aside for now. We'll want to prep our zipper gusset, so you'll need both of your ZDs and your 4 pulls. Along with your ZTD, there's 2 of those, and your ZTD1 linings. And just like with the other zippers, we're going to start with singeing our zipper ends. And then slip a pull on each end. Now once those are on, we are going to take our lining right side down to the back side of our zipper, tape, and do each end, ensuring that your zipper is not twisted. And repeat for your other one. So take the back side of your zipper, take your lining fabric and place it right side down, and match both raw ends of your zipper, matching the right side of your fabric, the bottom side of your zipper. Now baste these on with a 1/8 seam allowance. Once those are basted, you can just double check that you made a loop. Now take your exterior tabs and place those right sides down onto your zipper. And you do that on both ends. And then you can turn out your zipper if you would like real quick. I haven't. This will be bigger once the clips aren't there. But you can ensure that your zipper is not twisted and that you make a loop. And I'll repeat that prep on the other side. Again, my tab right side down on the top part of my zipper. And turn to check. Now sew these with that 3/8 seam allowance. Now within basting your lining first and then sewing your exterior, that allowed you to be able to now trim your exterior fabric only to help reduce bulk in your assembly. Once corners are clipped, you can go ahead and turn those out. And then sew around the perimeter with a 1/8 seam allowance. And repeat for your other gusset. Now these are prepped. You can go ahead and set these aside for now and work on your mesh pockets. For our mesh pockets, you'll need your 2 pieces of C3 along with your binding. And then if you are using a label tag, you'll need that now. You can, for ease of attaching your binding, you can apply double-sided tape to each of your edges. I'm not going to do that, but you definitely can. I'm comfortable without doing that. I'm going to cinch the end of my binding since the fabric allows it. I'm just going to fold over the edge, and I'm using fold over elastic. Just going to go a little bit down to get me started with clipping it over. And you're going to sew your binding on with a 1/4 seam allowance. Now for my binding, when I'm doing this, I just make sure that my binding is underneath my fabric, and then I just fold over in little working increments. I'm going to slide my other one on. Now this is the one that I'm going to add my label tag to. And with your label tag, you just want to ensure that your label is at least 1 1/4 inch away from the edge. And there's our one mesh with binding and a label tag, and our other mesh with binding. You want to trim any excess binding, and you can also singe the edges to prevent fraying if your material allows it. I'll grab your 2 pieces of D that you will want to be on the total inside of your bag. So you'll see it when the bag is completely open and laid out. You'll take your mesh and you'll align those right side up with your fabric right side up. Now we can go ahead and baste around our perimeter to hold these in place. you can trim off any excess binding and mesh, especially around your corners. Now, if you would like, you can draw a divider pocket down your mesh. It is completely optional, but I will show you what one will look like. This one I'm just going to do perfectly down the middle. Then sew a line up and back down. And there's that, so you'll have the two mesh pockets. Now we can set these aside for now. If you are doing the cover clip, you will want to grab your 2 pieces of CC. If you are not, you can skip to step 20. For the cover clip, you will want to match your fabric right sides together. Then on one of your sides, you will want to draw a birthing gap of 2.5 inches. Leaving space between your top and your bottom corner. And you'll prep your other one. I'm going to sew around the perimeter with a 1/4 seam allowance, and then at these markings I'm going to sew an L stitch. Doing that will make it easier to fold in the raw edges neatly later for when we close our birthing gap. And I'm going to sew with a 1/4 seam allowance. And when I get to that marking, we're going to turn and make our L stitch. So there's our one L, and now to make our other L stitch. And now we'll repeat on our other. Now there's the other ones of the L stitches. Now trim your seam allowance corners, making sure not to snip into your stitches. Now you can turn those out. I'm going to use my hemostats to help
pull out my corners. And now those L stitches will help you fold down that fabric to where your seam allowance is. Place some clips to hold this side in place, and repeat on my other, and then I'll be able to clip this closed. And then you can ensure that you are happy with your stitches before closing your birthing gap. Okay, there's one, and I'll repeat for this one. Now we're going to top stitch around the perimeter, leaving the edge that's folded, not top stitched. So we're going to go top stitch our joined seams with a 1/8. Now repeat. Now, those are ready for their snaps. And then from our top stitched top edge, you'll want to measure in 3/8 both sides. On both of your pieces. Now you take your dowel and make your holes. Depending on your fabric, it may be easier to use a punch. Now you can insert your snaps. You'll be doing the male snaps, so you'll use your cap, and you'll put your cap on whatever side of your fabric is what you want it for the outside. Those. And also, depending on your fabric choices, it may be helpful to have the longer prong caps so that you have a little bit more fabric to, or a little bit more of a peg to work with when pressing. And then I'm gonna go ahead and set my snaps. I like to put my male snaps inside of my die piece so that I don't smash it whenever I just lay it in there. I seem to somehow always smash down the side of my male snap. So to prevent that, I've started doing that. Once that in. Okay. There's that one, and then I can repeat on my others. And those are done and ready to be attached to your panel. So you can set these aside for now. Now, if you didn't do those covers, then this is where you'd be picking up with on your make, which is step 20. So you'll have your 2 pieces of short webbing and your 2 D-rings that match the size of your webbing. I'm going to singe my webbing ends. Once you singe your ends, you want to take your webbing, and if there's a right and wrong side of your webbing, you want to mark on the wrong side of your webbing 2 inches down. And then apply a strip of 1 inch double-sided tape to the center of your webbing. And remove the backing. Then take one of your D-rings and slide it on your top. Match your top edge down to that 2-inch marking. Enclose your D-ring. Now on the other end, you're going to fold it up and match that marking, and that will be the bottom of your tab. That's what it will look like. And then you can place another small piece of double-sided tape in the center for when you go to adhere it to your panel. Now repeat with the other piece. Now your D-ring tabs are ready for the side gusset assembly. Place these slightly off to the side for now. Now take the bottom piece of C and take your ZC zipper tab and align that along your center point. And then baste with a 1/8 seam allowance. And now repeat on your other panel. The zipper tab and align that along your center point. And then baste with a 1/8 seam allowance. Now take your lining to your bottom half of C and place that right sides down to make your fabric right sides together, encasing your zipper tape. And then sew with a 1/4 seam allowance. And then repeat for your other panel. Now that we've repeated those for the panels, you can go ahead and snip your seam allowance corners. And turn this right side out. Now we're going to baste around our perimeter and top stitch along our zipper. So sewing around with a 1/8 seam allowance. Now repeat on the other panel. Now we're going to baste around our perimeter and top stitch along our zipper. So sewing around with a 1/8 seam allowance. Now once our bottom linings are attached, we can attach the top part of C to our center point of our upper part of our zipper tape, aligning it right side down. So again, the sides will be right sides together. Before proceeding, ensure that you've attached your C2 stabilizer. And now we're going to sew across with a 1/4 seam allowance. And yes, we're not going to baste this one on first because there's not going to be a lining attached to this part until later. And snip off your seam allowance corners. Then you can repeat for your other panel. Now that both of your panels have the top sewn on, we're going to take our piece of D that has the duckaville and the ribbon attached to it with it right side up, taking our panel and placing it also right side up, so that the linings will be right sides together. Placing those right sides both up and then clipping around. Now when you get to the seam, you want to keep the seam up and push your fabric up. Again, ensuring that seam stays up across. If you would like, you can place some double-sided tape along the top part of your zipper to ensure that that stays flat and up, which it should because of the natural way of the zipper, just in case. As you can see, this across here wants to pucker down. Now you'll want to baste around your piece, and then we're going to top stitch along the zipper. I personally like coming in and top stitching across the zipper first so that I can maneuver my layers if I have to. Okay, so sewing with a 1/8 seam allowance. And you can unzip the zipper, get that seam facing up. Now I'm going to baste around the top portion. I can baste around the bottom portion. There's that one. Now you can repeat for your other panel. And here's what your back sides will look like. Now we can attach our D-ring. Now from our top center, we are going to measure down 1 3/4. So I drew a line across, that's 1 3/4 down from the top, and I marked the center of that. Now you're going to take your D-rings and remove the backing of the double-sided tape from the D-rings that we made in step 20 and align that centered right below the line. And now you can sew a box stitch as described in step 12, which we did to attach our webbings to our front and back panel. I am going to draw a line that's 1/2 inch down from the top of my D-ring top, because that way I can make sure that when I'm doing my box stitches, I leave enough room for my pressure foot to get around. And this also gives me good markings for when I'm doing my box stitches of where to start and stop. So I'm going to start off from this side, work my way up, sew across the line, sew down to my end, and then pivot to go up diagonally, sew across the line again, pivot to go down diagonally, and then pivot to sew across the bottom. And that will close in your box stitches. Up to that line, I'm going to start my needle back up on the incline with my pressure foot to turn. So across that line till I get to the end. And then sew down. Once I get to the end, I'm going to turn it so I can sew up diagonally. This is where I grab my ruler. Make sure that it's straight and find that corner. And sew back across. And sew down diagonally. And then we can sew across our bottom line. And then on the back side, this is what it will look like. And there's the D-ring, and we'll repeat for our other panel. Now, if you are doing the clip cover, then you will go ahead and proceed with step 25. And if you are not, then you will skip over and do step 26. Attach our clip cover. This time we're going to measure down 1 1/4 inch from our top. Draw a line so it's straight, and then find my center of that line. Now find the center of your clip cover and match it up against that line. And we're going to sew 2 rows of stitches. The first row is a 1/8 inch, and the second one you can either do 1/8 inch away from that row, or you can do 1/4 inch from the edge. And on my second row of stitches, there's our back side of it. Here's our front side. That's attached. You can trim off the remaining part of your zipper tab, following that little curve. If you like, you can use the pattern piece to trim those. Now you want to take the center of your zipper gusset ZD, the ones that have the 2 pulls on them, and you'll mark your center of your bottom gusset and then also the center top of your zipper tape. Make sure that you have a nice strong clear marking on your zipper tape top so that it's easy to identify for step 28. I'm going to take one of my panels with one of my gusset, now matching our center bottom gusset with the bottom center of our panel. And then the center of my zipper tape, right sides together with my top of my panel in the center. You can unzip. And work your way from your bottom out as you clip. And then you can work your way around and up. Then you can curve back your zipper a little bit so that way you can see how it would naturally fit around that curve. You should not need to snip into your zipper tape at all. With our sew around this perimeter, we are going to actually sew with a 1/4 seam allowance along our gusset length and then baste around the perimeter with a 1/8. That way everything will line up when we birth out upon the bottom. That was my 1/4 seam allowance. Now we're going to switch and baste around with a 1/8. You can ensure that you're okay and happy with your basting stitches and that your zipper didn't buckle anywhere. And repeat with your other panel. We're going to take our panel with our zipper gusset attached, and you can fold down our clip cover so it's out of the way. And then take one of your pieces of D with your mesh and place it right sides together with your panel so that it sandwiches in the zipper. I'm just going to match the center point to hold my panel together. Match my corners. Now you want to leave a birthing gap along the bottom. Leave a 6-inch birthing gap. So from my center, I'm going to measure 3 inches out on each side. And this will be my start and stop point. I'm going to clip around, making sure that my zipper is out of my seam allowance area and that it's flat. Now we're going to sew a 1/4 seam allowance around, making L stitches at our markings to help with lining up our birthing gap when we turn it out. You also want to check your bobbin thread right now so you don't run out while sewing and then top stitching at the next point. And sewing with a 1/4 seam allowance. And hemostats are very helpful around this point because you got to make sure that your zipper pull is up out of your sewing area and then that your zipper tape stays flat. But the hemostats allow you to pull and hold together those layers. Now you can turn out to ensure that you are happy with your stitches. Check your zipper tape around. Make sure that you don't have any puckers or gaps. And once you are satisfied with your stitching, you can flatten your seams. And also apply double-sided tape to this edge. You can remove the backing to your double-sided tape and fold that pocket under. Oh, you can go around flattening those seams. And you can top stitch around your perimeter with a 1/8 seam allowance. Sew across the bottom first, as that will close that birthing gap. And then around your zipper tab area, it will be a good idea to use your hump jumper to keep even top stitching. you can go around and check that you are happy with your stitches and that you caught all your birthing layer gap. Now we can repeat for our other panel. And then you can zip up your zipper. Now that these two panels are done, we are going to move on to step 28, which is that semi-scary step of cutting our zipper. So you take one of your panels and you unzip your zipper. And this is why it was very important to have that hard mark on both sides of your zipper tape. You can just double ensure that this is the center of your zipper tape. It's just a little harder to do that, which is why marking it is so important. Now, this is one of those trust the process moment. Yes, it is completely correct that we are going to cut on this zipper tape. Yes, it may be a little scary, but I promise it's the right thing to do. I'm going to cut the part that was not attached to your panel. Now we're going to singe those ends. Now, making 90-degree zipper ends with leaving no excess zipper tape over the edge. And now repeat on your other side. Now, as much of a fan as I am of singeing, these two zippers on both the panels are the zippers that I recommend also basting. And this is because my son was playing with my tester make, and when he was zipping up these panels, he pulled the zipper and just yanked past this 90-degree, so it unbuckled and my zipper kept going. So I had zipper part one and zipper teeth on this one, not one. And it was scary and stressful. And though I was able to get it back on perfectly without having to seam rip anything, I just know moving forward that I rather baste these than have to deal with that. So I'm going to baste these with a 1/8 seam allowance. Put that up, and that's how that would look. And yes, that gap there is normal. That's the separation from where you cut your zipper tape. Now to repeat for our other panel. Now to assemble the side gussets to the main body. With the side gusset unzipped, you'll want to place your panel right side down, matching your center point of your gusset to your base. Now, if you have any pretty pulls that you want on your side panels to face towards your front panel, so ensure that they are facing towards your front now. And we can clip the zipper on out. Now that zipper should end 1/2 inch from the top. same thing for the other end. Now I can base this on with a 1/8 seam allowance. Now again, because of this 90-degree zipper, I'm going to start a little bit farther down and then back tack up just to ensure that my zipper stays in place. When you get to your gusset where your pull is, make sure that your pull is out of your sewing area. We're going to do similar for this panel with the unzipping the zipper and matching it right sides together with our exterior main panel along the base. So center panel and center of base and the center of the side gusset. And also clip out. Once you've clipped all the way along your edge, you can ensure that your top and your bottom of your zipper has a 1/2 inch gap to the top of the panel. And now this time, unlike the other side, you want to mark your birthing gap on your make. And that can be anywhere between a 15 to 19 inch birthing gap depending on your fabrics, but you want to mark it because you're going to space from the top of your zipper down to your marking with a 1/8, and then you're going to sew from marking to marking with a 1/4 inch, and then from marking to the end of your zipper with that 1/8. So in the middle part, you're going to mark that 1/4 inch marking. So that way, when you sew your bag and then go to birth, your seam along this part of the birthing gap is already correct, and it will make lining up your bag easier. Now to sew that, I wanted to change the view to bring you closer so you can see the difference while sewing the seam allowance for our birthing gap. I'm going to start off lower than my 90-degree zipper end and sew with a 1/8 seam allowance. I'm going to sew backwards first. Again, that just helps keep that in place. Now I got to where my birthing gap marking is. Depending on where you've marked yours and how big you want, big or small you want your gap will depend on where that marking is. So now I'm going to increase to a 1/4 seam allowance. Now when you get to your zipper pulls, make sure your zipper pull is out of your sewing area. Now continue to sew with a 1/4 seam allowance until you get to your other marking. Now that I've made it to my other marking, you can now decrease back to 1/8. Now you'll sew that until you get to the end of your panel. Another good thing to ensure and double check is that your 90-degree zipper end is still stopped and started along the way at the 1/2 marking along the 4 corners. And now your exterior main body is finished being put together. And you can take a moment to zip up and admire your work. Here is what it looks like zipped up for the exterior. Here's our back panel, side panel, front panel, and our other side panel, and then our base. You can set this aside for now as we work on our interior. And if you would like, you can also take a little break. Now we can assemble our interior lining, starting with our flap cover. So we'll need our piece of ZE zipper along with a pull and your ZTE zipper tab. You take your zipper tab and cut into 4 even pieces. Take your zipper tape and singe your ends. And then you can slide on your pull. Then you can take your zipper tabs right sides together and sandwich an end of your zipper in between. Repeat on the other side and sandwich with right sides together in between your zipper tape. Now we can sew with a 3/8 seam allowance. And you can turn your zipper tabs right side out and sew around the perimeter with a 1/8 seam allowance. zipper tab. And now our zipper for our flap cover is done. We need to grab one of your pieces, E1, which is one of your flap cover pieces, and you're going to cut 2 inches from the top. What you do, your piece will look like this. And then with your fabric right side up, you're going to take your zipper and place it right side down. And I'm actually going to match, find the center point of my zipper. Just so that my tabs are even on each side. And find the center piece of my panel of both pieces. I'll take your zipper and place it right side down with your fabric right side up. Match my center point. Now we can sew with a 1/4 seam allowance. And trim your seam allowance corners. And then you can turn your zipper to face up, pressing that seam down. And then you'll top stitch with a 1/8. That's the bottom half. Now you can repeat the same with the top half, this time taking your panel with the right side up and then facing it right side down onto your zipper. And then again, sew with a 1/4 seam allowance. And trim your seam allowance corners and turn out, and then top stitch again with that 1/8. And now you can go in and trim any extra zipper tab if there is any. On the front side of our panel, and there's the back will look like. Now we can set this aside for a moment and grab our other piece of E1 lining along with our Velcro. So you want to take your Velcro piece, that's the hook side, which is your scratchy side, and cut that in half. once your pieces are cut in half, you can attach double-sided tape to the middle back of them. This will help hold them in place for sewing. So again, making sure that you're taking your hook side and on the right side of your fabric, so with your fabric right side up, you'll want to measure from the bottom up 1 1/8 inch, and then from your side over 3 1/4 inch. So 3 1/4 from the side and 1 1/8 from the bottom. You can remove your backing to your double-sided tape and then place that corner at that marking, so that way your side of your Velcro is 3 1/4 inch away from the side. And then I like to take my ruler over and make sure that the height of that 1 1/8 is carried out all the way through the Velcro piece, so that I can ensure that it is straight. And repeat on the other side. So again, you'll make sure that it's 1 1/8 inch up from the bottom, and then 3 1/4 inch away from the side. And then you'll match that point to the point of your Velcro. And there are those, and now they can be sewn on with a 1/8 seam allowance. You sew around the perimeter with a 1/8. And then there's one. I did stick with my black stitches since that's what I'm using throughout my whole bag for you to be able to see it better during the video. However, I do recommend using a stitch that matches your Velcro, at least on the Velcro side, so that it is less noticeable. Because with the scratchy part of the Velcro, they don't always seem to be the prettiest of stitches. Now those are stitched on. Go ahead and then grab our front piece and lay that right sides down. So you'll have right sides together with the Velcro towards the bottom part and your zipper towards the top. If you have a zipper that is difficult to open from the back side, you can go ahead and unzip your zipper now. But you'll want to clip around the whole perimeter, because once this is sewn, we're going to turn it out through that zipper. And because of the material that I am using, I do need to use a good amount of clips so it doesn't shift around too much, because this stuff will shift like crazy. Now we're going to sew around this with a 1/8 seam allowance. Now you can turn out through your pocket zipper. And make sure that you caught all your layers before you go around and top stitch. Just going to use my hemostat real quick to help poke out those corners. And before you top stitch, you just want to make sure that your zipper's on the top side of your front and then your Velcro on the bottom side of your back. And again, because of the material that I'm using, it's kind of slippery. I'm going to use a few clips around the edges just to keep my seams pressed together so they don't slip around when I'm top stitching. Depending on your materials, you could give this a little press with an iron before top stitching if you would like. Just be careful with your zipper. The top stitching for this is a little unique, as we're going to top stitch with a 1/8 across the top, and then along our two sides and the bottom will be a 1/4 seam allowance. That will enclose our raw edge of our fabric. Our raw edge of the top will be enclosed later when we do our top stitching towards the panel. So again, the top stitching with a 1/8. And now top stitch along the remaining three sides with a 1/4. of that. So those stitches around the bottom and the sides would hide that raw edge. You'll have most likely a teeny tiny little bit of pieces hanging out here or there on your top stitching one, but those will be fully enclosed once we attach this to our main panel lining. Now we can set this aside while we work on our suit compartment. Now for your suit compartment, you will need to take your zipper ZF, which is the last of our zippers, with a pull, and singe the edge of your zipper tape. Attach your pull. And then on the other end, opposite from the side that your pull went onto, we are going to make a 90-degree zipper without any excess on our zipper. So you're just going to fold down so that your top edge meets your side. Like that. And you can either base that or you can singe it. And again, repeat on this side, just folding down and meeting your edges. So there's our 90-degree zipper for our suit compartment. And you can place this off to the side for now. Now that we can work on our suit compartment. So you'll need 2 pieces of F, which are the pretty skinny, really long pieces. And with them facing right side up, we're going to place our Velcro on them. I'm going to set one aside for right now, so I can grab my remaining piece of Velcro, which is our loops, which is that soft fuzzy side, and cut it in half. And then place double-sided tape on the back side of them. Oh, look at that. That was just nearly the perfect amount of double-sided tape. Okay. So, if you have fabrics you want to use for the upper part of your suit compartment lining, so the part that you would see when you open up your bag, you'll want to use those 2 pieces. All mine for this one are the same. So it doesn't matter which one I grab. It just matters that they're right side up. I'm going to remove the backing of my double-sided tape off my Velcro. And I'm going to measure down that 1 1/8 inch and over the 3 1/4. Now you'll want to do that from your edge that you'll have your zipper. So my zipper is going to go on this side, because my other panel is going to come over here. So you'll measure down the 1 1/8 over the 3 1/4. Place the corner of your Velcro there. And just so I make sure that my Velcro runs across straight, I'm going to measure across 1 1/8 just to make sure it's even. That one. This one aside. And now I can prep my other piece. So again, with it right side up, taking the backing off of my Velcro at your top edge, that's going to have the zipper. So this would be my zipper side this time. And to measure down the 1 1/8 and in the 3 1/4. Place the tip of my Velcro at that marking. And then measure across the bottom. So then when you have your two panels, your Velcros will go towards the inner edges. So they'll be closer together here than they will be from the sides. And now you can baste these on with a 1/8 seam allowance around the Velcro. Again, you can change to a color that matches your Velcro better. There's that one. And now repeat for your other panel. Now there's that second one. So again, it will look like that. Now you can grab your ZF zipper back. And I like to mark the side of my zipper that the tooth is the lowest on, because I know that will be the side that needs to go into my zipper pull first. And then you can separate your zipper, or if you would like, you can baste these on one by one before separating them. So I'm going to separate as per step 43 of the instructions with my panels. I want to make sure that you're grabbing your one closer to it. So that's the side that your thing is only that 3 1/4 inch away from. So your zipper will go on these sides. One at a time. I'll do my left panel first. Now we'll want to measure down from the top edge 3 1/8 inch. And that will be where your zipper will start to go, and you'll place your zipper, the 90-degree end, right side down onto your panel. That marking. So your panel is right side up. Your zipper tape will go right side together with it, so right side down onto your fabric. And you'll clip your zipper onto the side closest to your Velcro. And you'll most likely have a little extra at the end that will help you get your pull on later. So there's our one side prepped. I'm gonna prep our other side. Again, making sure that you're grabbing the side closest to your Velcro. Marking down that 3/8 of an inch from your top. And matching your zipper right sides together, aligning that 90-degree end at the marking. and then clipping on your zipper that was closest to your Velcro. That one. Now once those are clipped, you can just ensure that you have the same amount of excess zipper tape at the end of your panels. Now we can baste these on. You can also just double check with laying your panels out one more time before basting that you have them to where your zipper will be able to be stuck later with your Velcro closest to your zippers. Basting these on with a 1/8 seam allowance. Repeat with the other panel. Now this one, with still wanting to sew with my zipper tape up, I'm going to start farther down than my 90-degree zipper end and then sew backwards, just so trying to get over that zipper tape is easier for me. You could use a hump jumper. For some odd reason, I struggle with trying to keep the zipper tape in place, get the hump jumper in there, and all of that. So I just back tack over it, and then I can baste down. And then before moving on, you can ensure that your tops are still that 3/8 inch away, and that nothing shifted during it. And those are good. You can take your other 2 remaining pieces of F, or your shoe compartment lining, and place those right sides together to the ones with our Velcro. So you'll have one with Velcro and one without. Place those right sides together, and you'll match up your top edge and then the long edge with your zipper, so you can sandwich your zipper in between. So there's the one, and you're going to leave your other edge, long edge without the zipper, and the bottom part unclipped. We'll repeat with our other panel. So again, one with the Velcro and one panel without, placing those right sides together, sandwiching your zipper, and matching along the top. long edge and then the top edge. Now we can sew these with a 1/4 seam allowance just across that top edge and along the edge with the zipper. And I'll repeat that 1/4 seam allowance with the other panel. Now that those are done, you can go ahead and snip your seam allowance corners. Just make sure you do not snip into your zipper tape. Trim those corners. Do not trim into your 90-degree zipper. Turn your fabric right side out, and then you'll be top stitching that join seam along and then down along your zipper, and we'll base stitch around the other two ends. I'm just gonna match up my corners and a few clips along the raw edges, just to keep my fabric from slipping around too much when I'm stitching. There's that. And repeat on the other panel. Now I can top stitch along your top and your zipper and then baste around the perimeter. So you're going to sew around the perimeter with a 1/8 seam allowance. This is a good time to also check your bobbin thread again, just because you're going to be doing some long top stitching along your top and down your zippers. Get this one off to the side real quick. And then real quick, this is where having the extra table comes in handy, so that it can support your other end of your bag, and this will definitely come in handy the more farther you get into the bag and adding your layers. Once you have it all together, and combining your lining to your exterior, a lot of weight will be added. So those extra table length will be very helpful. So here is one of our completed panels. I'm going to set this one aside and do our next one. Start my top stitching from my zipper side this time. Now you want to put on your zipper pull to ensure your proper alignment before proceeding on to the next step. Okay. And those zipped up perfectly. As that. Here is my whole panel. Now you can take your piece of F1, which is your suit compartment base lining, and ensure that you put on your pull so your panels are together, and align this base right side down. That's right sides together with your top of your suit compartment. Once that is on, we can then sew this with a 3/8 seam allowance. Hold up my suit compartment just so I have a little bit more control over that end. We're sewing with a 3/8 seam allowance. Can do before we grab our main lining, you can press your flap down, ensuring that your seam gets pressed towards the bottom. And take a clip, hold that seam. And then on the other side, take a clip and hold down that seam. And then if you have any excess zipper tape, you can go ahead and trim that off now if you would like. And I'm gonna singe that zipper tape because I did just cut it. Now I'm going to change view because we are going to need our piece of E, which is our main lining, and that's that really big piece, and we're going to connect these. So here is our suit compartment lining, and then you'll take your piece of E, which is your main lining. Push that down, so this will be lining right side up. And then your suit compartment, also right side up. And that's your bottom edge. Now this time, because I'm working with such a big piece, I don't want it shifting a lot during sewing. I do recommend using a decent amount of clips so that you're working in smaller sections that are held together and haven't moved around as much. And then again, when you clip these, make sure that that seam is pressed down. If you would like, you can take some double-sided tape towards this part of the seam so that when you fold it, you can stick it down to your lining, and that will help keep that in place. And then we'll clip up these sides. And then you'll have a good decent amount of access at the top. Well, this is what your panel will look like. You'll have the access at the top. You'll have your panel clipped along the sides, and then also clipped along the bottom where that base lining is. Now, before we baste on our suit compartment lining to our main lining, we want to ensure that this gap between the top edge and the suit compartment lining is the same distance across the top so that the spacing is consistent. And just real quick. So you just want to make sure that this side and that this side are the same height away across. That will ensure that you have proper alignment for the flap. Now I'm going to go ahead and start by sewing this base on first, sewing across this seam so I can ensure that that seam is pressed down towards the bottom, and then I will sew across and then back up and then baste my other side. Okay. Top stitch. Seam, which requires me to go this way. So I'm going to roll my panel together so that it's less to work with and I can get it underneath my machine because of the way that I sew. It's hard for me to get my seams right going from the opposite side. I'm going to sew across the seam using a 1/8 seam allowance, ensuring again that that center seam is pressed down towards the base. Now that I have that rolled up, I don't have as much fabric to control on my towards me, and I can just unroll as it feeds back onto the table I have behind my machine. And now to base my other side. Again, I'm gonna roll my panel up so it's easier to work with. You just want to make sure that when you're rolling, you're not pushing your panel up any higher than what it should be. And then there's that all basted on. There's that bottom compartment. If you would like, you can undo your compartment now and just ensure that that seam got pressed down all the way, so that you don't see any of your stitches or any of your seams, which it did. Okay. So I'm gonna kind of place this off to the side for a moment. I'm gonna take our flat cover and on the top edge, fold in half, find that center point, and then measure 1 inch out on each side. So in total, you have a 2-inch opening. This will be the opening for your hanger. Grab your main lining again and align your Velcro. And within doing that, that should leave you a 2-inch gap at the top. Again, as long as it's consistent across your top, that is the important part that we are going for once your Velcro is lined up. Again, with your Velcro matched, laying your flap down, just quickly ensure that your flap is the same height across your panel. You can use some masking tape to keep it in place if you like. I like to set a piece of masking tape in between my markings so that way it's a visual aid to me to say like, hey, you don't want to sew in between there, because that will be our opening for our hanger. Now we're going to sew this flap on with 2 rows of stitches on each side. First with a row of stitches over top of our 1/8 seam allowance, stopping and starting again at our markings, and then sewing again along the other side of our 1/8 marking. And then we'll do another row of stitches 1/4 of an inch away from the top, starting and stopping at those markings again and then to the edge. I like to back tack between these openings just to reinforce that seam a little bit. And then I will walk you through that again as we're physically sewing that. Once again, roll this up a little bit so that there's not as much fabric to move around the end. I'm going to sew first row with a 1/8 seam allowance, and that will be over top of our previous stitches. I sewed to that marking. I'm going to back tack a little, sew forward till I get to that point again, and then I'm going to lift up my needle and I'm going to shift my bag over to my other marking that's 2 inches away, and put my needle down, sew a little bit, back tack to reinforce that stitch, and then sew continuing over my previous stitches. There's the first row of stitches. Now we can go back and sew our second row, which is 1/4 of an inch away, or you can do 1/8 inch away from your first row. And again, we will want to sew until we get to that first marking. Once you get there, do a tacking stitch. Once you get back to the marking, you can lift your needle, shift your bag until you get to the second marking. Place your needle down, sew a little bit, back tack, and then finish your row of stitching. And then those 2 bits of drawstrings, you can just take and snip those off. I just leave the ones that are on my back ones there because they won't make a difference. There's that. There's your little piece for your hanger, and then your Velcro flap. Now our interior is completed and we are ready for final assembly. Definitely take a short break if you would like, as you're going to have a little bit of an arm workout for the final assembly, just balancing and propping your bag. Welcome back from your break. If you ended up taking one, I changed the camera view and also grabbed my exterior lining as it's easier to show with this one facing up. So here's our exterior. I'm going to have the panels facing in. You'll find your size that you had marked for your birthing gap, which had that greater seam allowance along the zipper tape. I'm going to mark that so you can see it. Now take your lining and place it right side down so it's right sides together with your panel exterior. Now there is no right or wrong way for which end of your flap goes on which part of your exterior panels. However, it is preferred to place it along your panel, your back panel, so your flap will be aligned to your back panel. So that way, if by chance you pick up your bag by the hanger and you still have something in your slip pocket version, it then doesn't go tumbling out on the floor. You'll want to pull in your webbing so that's out of the way, and then matching along our edges. And clip around. Now, with this piece being so big, I do recommend using a decent amount of clips, so that way you're working in smaller areas. And you'll clip along the whole long side of your edge that was just basted, and not the one that has your birthing gap on it. And then across our other edge, so across this one's our top, making sure your webbing is out of the way. Now for the side that will have our birthing gap that we ended up marking and having a greater seam allowance during our zipper. So I had those clips where those markings were, and you'll just clip from those markings up. Okay, leave that center open. And then from the other marking, one up. Now remember, your birthing gap should be around 15 to 19 inches depending on your fabrics. We are going to sew L stitches. I'm going to sew L stitches right here and not sewing across this area. I'm going to start and work around my perimeter sewing with a 1/4 seam allowance. These L stitches will help with lining up our birthing gap later. Your markings now you want to ensure are either smaller than your previous markings or equal to, so that your seam allowance is the same throughout your whole zipper tape after birthing. To a bird's eye view of the sewing bed as a whole, so you can swatch and see the fabric around the whole bag as I'm sewing. So I am going to start off doing my L stitch with that. I'm going to start off doing that L stitch. And then remember, you're going to want to sew with a 1/4 seam allowance around the perimeter until you get back to your other marking. This is where I'm going to roll my panel. All of it's in front of me, or you can use a high back chair to help support the weight. And when you get to your zipper gusset, make sure your zipper pull is out of the way. this was my back panel. So my pull was at the very end. And that's gonna make that a little hard to sew across. So I'm gonna move my pull real quick and then make sure you push your pressure foot back down before moving on. Now this will be the last little stretch of joining our seams before birthing. So I'm only gonna sew down to my birthing gap. Now that I'm at that marking, I'm going to turn and finish off my L stitch. Now depending on their fabrics, that might have been a little bit of an arm workout. So you can definitely take a break before birthing the bag if you would like. Now we're going to snip our seam allowance corners. Make sure that you do not snip into your zipper tape. If you did not cut off the front and back panel zippers overhang, you can do that now. Just make sure that you also then singe over those. Other corners. Okay, and now we can turn out our bag and check that we are happy with our stitches. I'm going to use my hemostats to help poke out those corners. You can make sure that you're happy with your stitches and that you caught all your layers around before you start top stitching. This is also a good time to press those seams. Once you've gone around and pressed the seams and checked that you are happy with your stitches, you can place some double-sided tape along our birthing gap. And then you can remove the backing to your double-sided tape. And fold that back. And once this is lined up and closed, we can go ahead and top stitch our panel starting right at our birthing gap. So you can enclose that first before top stitching around the rest of your perimeter. I'll go ahead and switch camera angles so that you can see that better. I'm going to start my top stitching slightly above where my birthing gap is. I'm going to make sure I enclose all of the layers and then sew down, making sure that those layers are all enclosed with your birthing gap. Top stitching with a 1/8 seam allowance. It is also a good idea before stitching around your panel to ensure that you have a good enough bobbin thread. You're going to want to sew with this side panel. Hold it down. And then remember to go slow so that you can catch all of your layers. And ensure an even top stitching. Fold your side panel so that it can fit under your machine. And then once you get past your birthing gap area, you can check back to ensure that you grabbed it all before continuing. Around your corners is a great place to use the hump jumper. Ensure your webbing is out of your sewing area. I just folded up my panel so that way it's less weight on the front. And our last little bit, we are now in the home stretch of it, as I just need to sew down till I get to the start of my birthing gap. And now you can go around and ensure that you are happy with your stitches and that you caught all of your birthing gap. Now, if you did not do the cover clips, you are now finished your bag and can zip up and admire your work. If you did do the cover clips like I did, you will need to make our markings for our female snaps along with attaching our female snaps. So from our corner, you'll want to measure from your side from your zipper tape in 7/8, and then down from your top edge, not your zipper tape, 3/4 of an inch. So we got 3/4 of an inch down from our top and 7/8 of an inch from our zipper teeth. Yeah, there's a 3/4. So right here will be our marking. And we'll do that on all of our 4 corners. Now, once your markings are made, you can ensure that they are 2 inches apart, and that when you take your snaps to line them up, that they would line up to those markings. And then you can poke a hole at those markings. You'll want to place your cap on the back side, and then depending on your fabric choices, it could be very helpful to have an extra long prong snap. So the corners from the zipper. We'll place our female snap. I'm actually going to do the same thing I do with my tops, which is place my female snap on my die piece so that I don't have to worry about the lineup. And then there's one, and then you can repeat for your others. And now all of our snaps are inserted. Now we can zip up our bag and admire our beautiful work. Now that we have attached all of our snaps, you can go ahead and zip up your bag to admire your hard work. And there's our completed tailor convertible duffel in the birthing version. I hope you enjoyed sewing this bag as much as I did today. Please make sure to like and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on any upcoming content. Thanks. Happy sewing. Bye everyone.